Can we wait two minutes, Johannes?
I just went on live.
Okay.
We're live now. Can I record? And record camera.
Well, I'm very happy that Aviva Rahmani was able to join us. She's doing her PhD right now. She's in Zurich, that's linked to the University of Plymouth, and she's based in the States. And she works in the area of ecology and performance. And she's an artist fellow with the University of Boulder in the Institute of
Alpine and
Arctic Research.
Research, correct.
And what she's going to do, which is lovely with us today, is she's going to be talking to us about her work and the history and what's led her to the place of doing work with performance and ecology, but also actually take us through a little workshop, which will be lovely. So part of this will be participatory towards the latter part of the hour. So I'm very happy you could come, and this adds a very rich element to our research area. And I know that Joe, who does work in this area, Joe Marlon, who's here, part of our staff, will have interesting questions, because this is our area, one of our areas of research, moving into this area of research. So welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here with you. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of background before I launch into talking about my current work and what we're going to do here today, because I think it's important. And what I think is important is the work of Alejandro Jodorowsky. Are any of you familiar with the name, or are you familiar with Grotowski's work in the theater? These were Polish theatrical people. And one of the things that Jodorowsky said in the mid-60s that really changed my life was that theater should leave no residue except the psychological change in the person. And I took that very much to heart. That was during the Vietnam War period in the States. I started my own performance group, the American Ritual Theater. I named it after the Polish Ritual Theater, kind of in honor of these people. And then about 1970, things in the States became so politically volatile and so dangerous that I began to rethink what I wanted to do. I went back to graduate school at that point. I got my master's with Alan Capro. I really rethought the whole art-life relationship. And out of that is really what has come my theoretical approach to ecology and performance. And there are 2 or 3 parts to it. One is that artists have a tremendous role to play in the sciences, and specifically that performance has an important role. And I should mention that I also spent 6 years working with Joseph Pilates, I was just saying, and what he taught me was how to move through the space as a whole person, a whole body. So we're going to get to that in the workshop. What I'm going to do now is take you a little bit through my work, some of the ideas, and then we're going to build up to you seeing a film and seeing an excerpt from a previous workshop. And interrupt me at any point if something is not clear, please. So one of the issues that I became very interested in was metaphors, how metaphors have tremendous power. This is an image that was from a film. It's a still from a film that was about rape that was done in the late 60s, early 70s as a series of iterations. And in relevance to the idea of metaphor, it was about how we rape each other, we rape ourselves very often emotionally, and we certainly rape the earth. And that was something that I began thinking about. And one of the things that happened to me at that period was I started thinking. I really started thinking about very simple ideas. So when I started the Ghost Nets project, which was a restoration work from 1990 to 2000, what had happened was I was in New York. I had been living in California, and I thought that I was going to go back to New York, but I went back to California, and it was a shopping mall, and New York was a shopping mall, and neither one did a thing for me. So I didn't know what to do. I went to sleep, and I woke up. I had a dream that I went to northern New England, to Maine, and I ended up on an island. And in my dream, when I got there, I was happy. So that's what I did the very next day. And a couple months later, I bought the town dump. And one of the reasons I bought the town dump was because I heard this story on National Public Radio about what they call the ghost nets. I don't know if any of you know that term, but ghost nets are the fishing monofilament drift nets, they're called, that go free from the boats. They can be 7 miles long, and they continue to fish and kill wildlife in the ocean for at least 7 years. And this seemed to me a perfect metaphor for what we do to ourselves and to the environment. We have these invisible traps and snarls and knots, and we get all wound up in them, and they kill us. And they keep going on and on and on. So I work very intuitively. To me, it made perfect sense that I heard about the drift nets. To me, they were an evocative metaphor, and so the next logical thing was buy the town dump. And one of the very early pieces I did from thinking about this was I created a bed of nets, because I think that's where we often get into a lot of trouble. This is the site that I chose. It was actually a former wetlands area on the coast of this island, the fishing island. The island is about 15 miles out to sea. And I first saw it in a heavy fog, but intuitively I knew it was the right place to start working. This is just a detail of what the site looked like in 1990. There was a hill and a quarry, a phenomenal view, and the whole site was trashed. It was about, I guess, two hectares total. But it was in the middle of Atlantic fly zone, so I knew it had to be important in terms of connecting things. And one of the first things I did was I brought a Native American healer up, Grandfather Thundercloud, and we did a traditional Native American medicine wheel ceremony. By 1997, I was starting to excavate the site. I took out 16 truckloads of debris, granite fill, that had clogged the salt marsh. And I have to say that the entire 10 years of working on this project for me were very performative. And I was doing them in pretty thorough isolation. My only contacts were through the phone at that time. It was very hard to have any internet service. And so I stayed in touch with people like Alan Capro, Barbara Smith, Carolee Schneeman, people who were longtime good friends, and I would have these long conversations with them about what I was doing, about the meaning of what I was doing. And at the time, it seemed really crazy. I mean, I went to this remote island, I bought the town dump, and I started making it into something that made some sense. But I was doing something else too. I was thinking about what goes into changing anything, but specifically what goes into changing a degraded environment. And to me, this is very much of a metaphor about how we degrade ourselves and each other. And I'm trying to keep track of time because I have a plan. So in 1997, we actually restored it. And for the first time in 100 years, fresh water met salt water, and that meant that an estuarine system could come back to life. And an estuarine system is where birds get their food, it's where fish spawn, it's where water gets cleaned up. So it's pretty important. But it had been the third of a series of 45 sites that I'd studied. The first one I worked on in 1970, then I worked on another one in 1979, and so this was the third, and I've identified about 45 sites that I would like to look at. The project itself was divided into 3 parts, but one of the most important things I did for the whole project was I just walked the site. I just kept walking it over and over and over again with body consciousness, with acoustic consciousness, and tried to learn from the site. I began thinking in terms of the site as the proscenium, the fact that people knew I was doing it, because there were a lot of people that knew about it, made their imagination my proscenium, because no one was going to come there. But they knew that this artist, who'd been bi-coastal and kind of in things, went off to this remote island and was restoring a town dump. So it got me thinking about how to restore other sites and how can we make this kind of domino, a positive domino on environments that had been degraded. This was a site on the same island where a causeway had been very narrowed, and if you looked at the island, it looked like two chambers of a heart, and in the middle it was being squeezed. So I painted the rocks blue. And where I live, they're very proprietorial about their rocks. And there was a tremendous uproar, even though I'd gotten permission from the town manager and everybody else. And in fact, they threatened to subpoena me if I didn't immediately wash the rocks. So what I did was I said, okay, we'll have a wash-in. We'll have a teach-in about wetlands, and of course, all of us will gather and we'll wash the rocks. The rocks were actually very beautiful. There were about 60 or 70 of them, and they were painted with a translucent, pure ultramarine blue, and it was really beautiful. But some of them were really big. So we washed it, and it got restored. The area got restored. We restored 26, let's see, that's about, well, do you count acres or hectares? Well, it was 26 acres, which I think is about 15 hectares, something like that. And ultimately, the U.S. Department of Agriculture contributed $500,000 to the cleanup, so it was a big deal. And now it's incredibly gorgeous, and there are flocks of eagles. So, let's move forward. Okay, so then I started looking at other places. I spent about 10 years looking at other places that could be restored. This is the site of a museum in New York, and it happens to be the image of a parking lot, and the parking lot is on top of what should be a stream that would be feeding the river. Now I'm talking with one of the colleges there, and 10 years later, we may actually start working on restoring it. This was a sign that was in the parking lot. So I was doing all this on my little island and looking at all these places all over the world. In the meantime, climate change was moving right along. So I started working with scientists in webcasts, conversations. And again, to me, this was very performative. You want me in the light. Sorry about that.
I mean in the center.
In the center. Okay. How's this? Is this good? Now you're happy. I'm sorry about that. So I started working with Jim White, who's the director of the Institute for Arctic and Alpine Research at the University of Colorado at Boulder. And we began doing these webcasts. They were conversations. We began looking at 3 areas in the world that were both conflict zones and areas where there was tremendous ecological degradation, and always in terms of climate change. And this was around the time right after Katrina. So I don't know how many of you believe in climate change. Is there anybody who does believe?
In what?
Climate change, global warming? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anybody who doesn't? Would you say it if you didn't? So I'm very, very concerned about climate change, but I'm going to sing you a song about the summertime. And what I'm hoping is that you'll think about summertime, just like I've meditated on this dump site and on restoration, and think about what things warming up might mean, because a lot of people think that climate change is just fine. We won't have winter. Summertime, and the living is easy. Fish are jumping, and the cotton is high. Well, your papa's rich, and your ma is good looking. So hush, little baby, don't you cry. time for the whole song, but that kind of gave you the idea. So then we started looking at other places where climate change and human conflict are coming together. And the way I was thinking about these things was the world is performing. We can engage in that performance. We can intervene in that performance and change the outcome, the denouement of what's going to happen, or we can just be passive audience to it. One of the areas I'm most interested in is Bangladesh and how it represents a conflict zone in relation to China and India over water from the Ganges. So obviously the problem is extractive industries, right? Is there anybody who disagrees with that? Fossil fuels, so it's oil and water water loses. These were images that began to come out of these webcasts that are now being exhibited in various ways. So part of what was happening was I was able to take a very tiny little village, middle of nowhere, and perform in the world without leaving. Of course, now I've left, but at the time, I was very interested in the idea of starting from a place that was remote and having an impact and an interaction with the whole world. And so at this point, I began to look at what are we really doing, and what we're doing is we're creating dead zones around the world. And to me, those began to be identified as potential trigger points for restoration. And what I meant by trigger points for restoration was that people come to very rich, fertile places, whether it's in their minds or on the earth. And we rape it, we pillage it, we plunder it, we murder it, so that we can live easily. And then we walk away and we go to the next place that we can devastate. But usually those places are rich because of the geomorphology. And you can think of the geomorphology as actually a proscenium where animals and people interact. So if the geomorphology is still there, then you can start thinking about the whole system, the larger system, and try to change the narrative. This is where you can intervene by thinking as a performance artist. You have options, you have choice, there's data, and on the other side you have fear. But as artists, we can get past the fear and we can take people past the fear. So trigger point theory is a working hypothesis about how this would happen, and I'm not going to go into it in a whole lot of detail because it gets into geographic information systems and biogeography that would take a semester for me to explain, and I might put you to sleep. So we're not going to go there. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a film of, I hope, how I think about this, if I can find it. There we go. So it has to load. While it's loading, I'm going to ask you to start thinking about something else, which is fracking. Does anybody know that term? Fracking. Yeah. Where is my... Fracking is the process. No, this is... Here we go. Okay. Fracking is the process by which people drill down 2 to 3 miles. They inject extremely toxic chemicals up to about 200 different ingredients, and then they explode them, and they explode them at such intense levels that it's like an earthquake. And the toxic chemicals spread out horizontally. They use a tremendous amount of fresh water to reach the natural gas, which is the goal, and then they extract the natural gas. So the result is they destroy the local aquifer, they destroy the local habitat. It can be for many miles. You can take a match and you can light the water that's coming out of the tap. There's a great film that Josh Fox just did called Gasland about exactly that. So let's see if we can get this to play. Does anybody know why it's not playing? Yeah, I'm clicking on that. What this is a split screen, and we may have to do without it because anyway we're running out of time. I'll just tell you what it is. And if you want to, there is an excerpt on my website. But it's a split screen where you see the grass literally growing in the salt marsh. And on the other side, you see the British petroleum spill expanding over the Gulf of Mexico. And the only sound is the sound from the salt marsh. So you have these two events happening. Is it going to play? What? No, it's not going to play? You want to take a quick look at it? Maybe I think it's the wrong folder. All right, so let's go to Finder and go here and see where'd it go? It should be.
Do you have VLC?
It's underneath, and if you drop it maybe in your QuickTime player,
Okay.
it'll be fine.
Ah, so where's QuickTime?
I don't see it. Yep.
Aha.
But,
There we go.
Go on the file underneath here. Where is your film?
There it is.
So drop this film into the QuickTime player and see whether that works.
Okay, it takes an expert, you see.
One.
I know why we're not opening it. I don't know if I'm going to worry about that. I can just, unless we can figure out what's going wrong.
Do you have it on here?
It's in the system.
It's in the system.
Yeah, but we can eject that and well, it goes directly to the workshop.
Why don't you reinsert it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because usually when you insert it, it loads itself.
Oh, it says MPEG Stream Clip is using it. I don't even normally use MPEG Stream Clip.
You just, put it.
Ah, here it is. Maybe this is it right here.
No, that's the same one.
That's the same one?
Close it and then...
Oh, here we go.
Apple quit the stream clip. Yeah, and then maybe reload the whole
thing in the trash.
DVD.
Okay. There we go. Put it back in.
Yeah, and it may just automatically...
Would you believe I'm doing a PhD, 1/3 of which is technology? I tell you, I would often not believe it myself. So is this it right here?
Just give it some time.
Yeah, just
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So while it's thinking about that, I think where this goes back to my experiences in New York when I was working with Pilates, and that was also the time of Warhol. A lot of things were going on in New York. It was the anti-war period, a lot of drugs. But you had the experience in New York that the whole city was the proscenium. Ah, thank you. You're going to rescue me, Johannes. The whole city was the proscenium, and as you walked, there was a rhythm to the walk. There was the sound, which was the soundtrack of the walking. There was the input. You felt that you were interacting with people. It was a full experience. And that is really the experience that I have of the environment. That wasn't the right thing to do, apparently. There we go. Okay. I'm trying to get it. There we go.
What is the image on the left?
That's the BP spill. What you're seeing is on the right-hand side, every hour, this special camera took one shot at a time of the marsh coming back to life, the marsh that I had restored on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side, there are a series of NASA satellite photographs, aerial photographs of the BP spill slowly spreading through the Gulf of Mexico.
So it's not the same area, that's in the Gulf of Mexico.
Correct. Since 2009, I've been working on a project called Gulf to Gulf, which compares the Gulf of Maine and the Gulf of Mexico. There are a number of issues I'm interested in besides the wetlands, including the fisheries. So I've been working with scientists from the Gulf of Mexico area specifically on some of the concerns there, specifically the dead zones that have been created.
Are you showing this as installation work in institution?
It's been shown in a number of different places, and it's still being shown, and I'm showing it in different ways. One of the things I'm experimenting with now is taking the same material and presenting it in different ways to see what happens. And that's what we're going to do with the workshop and very shortly. The first time, should I keep going while you're watching, or do you want to watch?
Watch a little bit.
Yeah, explain.
Beautiful.
Okay, thank you. The first trigger point workshop that I did was in Copenhagen during COP15 last year. And I did it with, had been invited as an official observer for the conference, but I was also participating in events with colleagues and activists outside the Bella Center. So I did a workshop on trigger point theory with a number of activists that were involved in what was going on in Copenhagen. And what we did was we tried to analyze if we really wanted to have an impact on climate change and we really wanted to be effective, were there other strategies than the strategies that we were experimenting with in the streets, or that mostly my friends were. I did very little. And it was very interesting to see how you might think differently if you looked at a few simple premises, like where can you apply the least amount of energy to have the maximum effect. If you think of any environmental situation as a situation of post-traumatic stress disorder, where do you approach that trauma? Do you approach it head-on or from the side? If you look at a metaphor of acupuncture, which I work with a great deal, you can either go to where the pain is, or you can go to where the pain starts. So on my website, I've just started to load some questions that I want people to answer. And one of the questions, or a couple of the questions are, where do you see the most significant environmental problem today? And then the second part of that is the location of the cause of the problem the same as where the environment is being degraded? And needless to say, in many cases it's not. One of the scientists, so that was it. One of the scientists I'm working with from the Gulf of Mexico, Gene Turner, is working on dead zones there. And I asked him, okay, if we were going to address one part of the Gulf of Mexico as the trigger point to initiate, to catalyze some restoration, where would you start? And he said, Iowa. Now, if you know the states, Iowa is a long ways away from the Gulf of Mexico, but it's where you have factory farming and a tremendous amount of pesticides and other pollutants, nitrogens that go into the Mississippi, come right down into the Gulf of Mexico, and in effect, they kill it. So now let's see if I can get this one out and put the other one in, because the other one is going to be a little excerpt from a workshop I did in New York, trigger point theory, specifically on fracking. And hopefully I can make this work a little simpler than the last one. But what's important to know about this is that I've described to you what fracking is. In October, when we did this workshop, I was part of a fairly large group of artists and others who were doing things about it. It looked hopeless. It looked like Halliburton and the whole industry was huge, had immense money. They had figured out how to get support from the people they were buying land from, and it was going to be a hopeless situation. Now, I have to say, since then, we have fought them to draw, and it looks like we have the whole country now very concerned about fracking. So let's see if we can watch this. What does it say? Not permitted. Oh, you can't do this to me.
Let's go full screen and see.
Why don't I let you rescue me while I continue to talk about this? So when we did this workshop, we spent about 2 hours.
The problem of
This is just 2 minutes.
the effect of extractive industries is a large part intellectual. But my premise is we're not going to solve it just with our minds. We have
Oops, sorry about that.
all our faculties, and one of our faculties is literally moving our body into the ideas. So what I want to see if we can do is just try moving around the space, embodying what you think has to be done, and see what happens. And Joel, you can be the mountain, or you can have your head topped off by mountaintop removal. You can be the mountain intact, or you can lose your head.
No, I think I'd rather be the mountain intact.
Okay, so right now you're the mountain intact. So why don't we go and try this? And I think, let's see.
You guys can only be the whole time because the meeting is produced.
You guys are trying to clean the river, but I'm the extractive industry, so I'm going to push back. But are you going to try to clean? I'm going to push. I'm going to keep pushing. So I'll start on you. We'll go with both of you. So are any of you going to help me here? Are you going to help me extract, or are you going to help me clean? You're going to help extract? Because you're one of the background. Are you going to intervene, Mary? I'm going to. She's strong. Yes, you're pushing it back. I want to extract. And actually, the corporations are few people. It's kind of like the European aristocracy. They exercise a tremendous amount of power until people figured out, hey, there are just a few of them. There are a lot of us.
So that's the excerpt from the workshop. Now we have enough time to do an experiment with this workshop if you'd like to try. So first of all, I want to ask you whether you have, let's see, we're going to be working on this blackboard. Should we move this over so it's in better light? I am concerned about the fracking issue internationally, but I wonder if there are other environmental issues that you feel are more pressing on your mind right now. Are there? Would you like, anybody like to identify some? Don't be shy. Are you concerned about water? Are you concerned about drought? Are you concerned about agriculture? Are you concerned, what?
I'm concerned about forests.
Forests. Okay.
And deforestation.
And what else?
Deforestation, how
Deforestation. Okay. So, water. Any others?
I'm concerned about air.
Okay. All right. This is what I, what?
Can I add one? I'm concerned about energy use. The
Energy.
use of energies, because that directly impacts on us.
And the food.
And food. Food supplies. Okay. So get up. So who wants to be food? Okay, you're going to be food. You're going to be air. You're water. What are you? Forest. What are you? You can be part of one of these others.
I'll be energy.
You'll be energy. Okay. Okay. So these two are energy. Okay. So let's move into the light here.
What can be water, air, energy, food, or forest?
Okay.
Forest.
You're the forest.
Okay.
Okay. Why don't you be in the center? You're the forest in the center. What relationship does water have to the forest? Where's water? Where's our water?
I'm water.
Okay. What relationship? Make a physical relationship. So you're going to support the forest. Okay. So I'm going to be the extractive industry, and I'm going to start pulling you. Okay. So what about the rest of you? What relationship do you have to the water and to the forest? You're the air. Are you going to be able to help in any way? Can the air help?
The air is, well, is it helping or is it's shifting? It's shifting.
We could be.
It's shifting.
Well, you have to act. What are you going to do?
Can I be coming at it from a positive or a negative?
You can do whatever you want, but you have to interact.
Okay. I'm trying to think of...
So the air is somehow going to interfere with extraction. How is the air going to interfere with extraction?
But with a storm. There's a storm.
The storm.
There's a storm.
Okay.
Air pressure. There's so much air pressure. There's so
Okay.
much air pressure that's coming. Are you air with me? No, I'm negative energy.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you that the water is going to start poisoning the forest. The forest is going to start dying.
What do I do? No, what should I do?
Well, you're struggling. You're struggling. And now the pollution is getting into the air, so the air is beginning to die too.
But the air circulates. And that's how it gets rid of the because that's the only way things get rid of if they circulate.
Okay, so I'm losing my grip.
Yeah. Because
I'm
it's circulating so much.
I'm losing my grip.
She's the industry person.
I'm the... Oh! Okay, so what has happened is the extractive industries lost their grip, but the forest still died, and the water still died. So what can we learn from this? And I have to tell you, I don't understand England very well. Maybe you can help me. Basically, this is England. Where is Lancaster? Up here. Where is most of your water? Where is most of the biggest watershed in the UK?
Oh, God,
Well, it's an island.
yeah, it's an island, but there are, I mean, it's probably more...
Well, towards the ocean.
Here?
Yeah, far up west.
This is water? You have a lot of water?
Sort of East Anglia, and it's the... Yeah.
Oh, wait a minute. You said west. You said west. Oh, so wait a minute. If it's west, this is where you have the water, right where they want to do the fracking. So if that's true, my conclusion would be you better not let them frack.
Who does the fracking?
Big companies like Halliburton, they make a lot of money.
Everywhere.
Right.
Who is actually wanting to... You're saying this is, that they're wanting to start doing this
Yes.
here now?
Yes,
And who
they've
are
already
the
started to
companies who have
purchase.
started?
They've already started to purchase the land. Halliburton
So it
is the biggest
Halliburton.
one. Yes.
Oh, it's true that the UK is selling, we're trying to decide what they sell, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
They just stopped that. They just sort of said, put a hold.
Well, what the industries are saying is that this is a clean energy, but it's not. The Polish government is already volunteered to go along with it because they'll make money. They'll make money from the taxes. So I think we've actually come to within 10 minutes of our hour. And I would love to have some comments and feedback from you about what you might have learned from this little exercise, if anything.
it's something that has to actually be more carefully thought through. You can't just go in gung-ho to address any issue. However,
Yeah.
However constructive and restorative your ideas might be. Yeah.
Think. What else?
But to think sensitively about the environment that you're working with as well. To be aware and be in tune with what needs to be done.
Okay, is there another word besides think that I should put up here?
Effort, human effort.
Yeah, you have to act.
Commitment.
Effort.
You know, in relation to the environment, what I often hear people say is, it's not enough to think and find solutions. But what I've seen in my years as an activist artist is that if you don't think very, very carefully about what you're doing, you're going to waste a tremendous amount of effort and sometimes of goodwill. So I think the way we're going to end this is I'm going to ask you to close your eyes, and I'm going to sing you a song, and I'm not even going to sing it in English. Ce soir tu désabords qui presse les voix passer tu des églises en nuages en l'espace les voix glisser aux alentours et quelques fleurs en bois sans entendre au pied du temps où That's it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So now we have some time for questions or comments or things that come to your... Yeah. It's your computer just digesting.
Yeah. Is there anything you'd like to add to this drawing that we've made?
I didn't understand your... Can you repeat the questions on what you asked about our relationship to such work? Is that what you asked?
I asked everybody what they felt they had learned from the exercise. And one of the responses was that what had been learned was that contemplating a problem can be just as important as acting on a problem. So I wrote down the word think. And then other people volunteered other ideas that they felt were critical to appropriate action, and that included effort and commitment.
I guess when you say contemplation can be as important or critical, that's not clear to me, because from your description of your long years of work, it seems that you made various kinds of decisions, for example, to move out and live in an environment, yeah? I don't know how you survived, but you must have somehow found a way to live and work
Right.
and actually accomplish the cleaning up, restoration actions. And that to me is far removed from contemplation and from receiving information or maybe reflecting on information. But to actually make that step and go to a remote island, only very few people do that. Wouldn't you agree?
Probably. That's why it existed as a good proscenium. As far as the relationship between contemplation and action, what had happened was I had gone to back to California, I come back to New York, and that's when I contemplated. And what I was contemplating was I didn't like either one, and I really didn't know what to do. What I decided after thinking about it a lot was I wanted to go someplace that was the end of the world and start pushing back to save the world. I thought of the island as the last place where degradation was going to reach. And if I could think about that there, then I could deal with degradation elsewhere. And that's when I found the town dump. And in that case, the contemplation was very quick because it just was intuitive. It was, this makes sense. And I figured everything else would fall in, and it did. I had built a house in California. I was able to sell it for a very good price. I was able to find a fisherman with whom I could partner in buying the land. One thing after another just kind of fell into place.
So you didn't plan?
Pardon me?
I was looking at the words that Joe and Gretchen just said, and I think I would include planification, because
Planification?
planification, like you have a plan of how to do something. You think about it, you rethink about it if something might go wrong. You do an effort to make your plan a practical thing, and then you commit to what you've planned. That's how I see
Yes.
it. So in this case, you didn't plan everything. It's
No.
kind of pessimistic thing.
Yeah, I think that's part of what I said in that workshop excerpt, that a lot of these huge issues will not get solved entirely intellectually. We have to let our bodies be in the situation, either in a real way or a metaphorical way, and find out what we can learn that way.
But you're...
I was just going to say that that is a problem, particularly for a British society as well, which is the only society I can talk because it's the only one I know. That because we are so far removed from our bodies, so many people's experience of climate change is not embodied. And so many people actually feel overwhelmed by it. Lots of the reporting, and the very good reporting that's gone on, has proven that lots of people feel that it's something that they have no control over, so therefore what can they do? So therefore let me just continue doing what I'm doing and not actually do something positive here. So I'm drawing an observation there really rather than...
I don't think it's just the UK. I think
I'm sure
that...
it isn't, but I can only talk about the UK because that's that.
Right, but one of the
I know
problems
it's
in
the
dealing
US
with climate change is the whole earth is getting so intensely urbanized that people in general don't know how to be in touch with their bodies, let alone
Yeah,
nature.
that's the point I was going to make really.
So that's a very big problem. But if we took the exercise that we just did, sorry about that, I need a prompter. If we took the exercise we just did, we had all the natural elements and then we had the extractive process. What ultimately happened was the extractive process was ultimately detached from the natural resources, but all the natural resources died. So what good is the extractive process going to be out here when there's nothing to sustain the extractors? I think you have to translate that. This isn't a question of fear, and that's what I think stops a lot of people on these issues, but it's a question of thinking practically.
I agree, and but that, I think it's part of the problem, because I think our disembodiment is because we see ourselves removed from the climate, from nature, and therefore we don't understand how we can be part of healing nature. Whereas if we could just become embodied again and understand that to be embodied is also to be part of our wider body, our wider natural environment, then we can actually be central to healing that. Because that's certainly what I'm interested in terms of my own research. Because I was interested in the way that you talk, it felt, and I may have misunderstood you, that you were seeing how the climate provided metaphors for how we are in relationships and in and of ourselves.
Right.
And I'm really interested in how our relationships and our relationships with our bodies and with other people is actually a metaphor for our relationship with the environment. So I think there is.
Well, I think you're getting to something that I think is really crucial, which is the interdependence.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's primitive actually. We've removed ourselves by becoming sophisticated beings. We've removed ourselves from what we actually are, which is utterly of the earth, and we've forgotten that.
Well, if I take well, you wanted to say something. Why don't you say that first?
I was going to ask, what do you think is the role of associations like Greenpeace, for example?
I think they're great. I think they're great.
Do you think,
I'm just saying that as artists, we can contribute something a little differently, and one of the ways in is through our body. To not just think about it, but think about it in our bodies. To feel these ideas in our bodies and let our bodies lead us to the correct conclusions.
I'm just asking this because I look at the members of Greenpeace, for example, and all the things I've seen them do. I consider most of them absolute artists because
Absolutely, I agree.
to the space and do things
like the whale wars stuff. Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think it's wonderful. I strongly agree. I'm basically saying we can do more. I'm not putting it in competition. And very often myself and my colleagues do work with activist groups. So I don't think it's either or. I think it's more how can we expand the field to push back. I think if you really get the idea that we're going to waste all our natural resources if we don't intervene with extractive industries, then you begin to start thinking practically about, okay, so now what do I do? And I don't think it's really ultimately about convincing other people. I think it's more...
Light.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. I don't think it's about bringing other people on board so much as if you put yourself in this process, it becomes clear what you need to do. And once you start doing it, then other people can see, they can visualize, okay, this is what I have to do next. So for example, with the fracking in New York, we all thought we had no way to push back. When we did the workshop, one of the things one of the most important activists said about it later in terms of what she learned was she realized from acting it out that the way the extractive industry was working was they were creating divisions between people. And so part of what began to happen afterwards was these divisions began to come together. You can't afford the divisions because it's too big of a war, it's too big of a fight. So you have to find some way to reach across to people that you wouldn't necessarily have something to do with and show them why it's in their interest to engage with you. I have no idea what's going to happen in the UK with fracking or anything else, but I know that if you sit on what troubles you, it becomes clear what to do, and part of sitting on it is to live in it with your body, and that's why I think these workshops may be valuable. Yes?
Sorry, I just was responding and I wanted to try to respond again to this question of embodiment, and you asked about the workshop, but I was looking at your text and I think you're working on your, is dissertation.
Yes.
And it says trigger points theory for aesthetic activism. And the notion of embodiment as well as aesthetics of activism doesn't necessarily ring convincing to me, because when I understood activism to be activism, it was political. In other words, it meant you involve yourself in direct action against a particular situation. Like if you think of the Green Movement. And I don't think we ever bothered to use the word embodiment, because it was a natural given that if you were to demonstrate or to invade a site, like they did with the boats and so on, you have to go into the site.
Right.
You did go into the site, and cleaning the dump to me was a very physical action, not an aesthetic action. Now the painting of the blue rocks, maybe that's more symbolic and maybe evokes other issues. But why do you call this activism aesthetic?
I am thinking in terms of performative structures. So, for example, the way I proceeded for the Ghost Nets project was first I found the site. Then I really thought through the idea of the proscenium, because a very big part of it was to establish a space in people's imagination. So periodically I would send out press releases and so on. I'm doing this phase, we're going to do the uplands riparian zone and so on. So images began to be created. It was a conceptual process. Yeah, it was a conceptual process in many ways. The actual day-to-day process was extremely ritualized. So, for example, I would walk the sites in a specific configuration. I built paths in relation to the environment, and I spend an hour each day just walking the path, listening, and sometimes singing with the sounds that I heard. I'm doing a short film now about that, but it's not done. So there was the acoustic part. I continually drew and painted what I saw. And as I did, it wasn't so much to create the paintings, so much as to think out what I was looking at. So at every turn, I used my body when I was walking. I used the audio when I listened and made sounds. I used visuals. When I sent out press releases, I would send some simple visual with them. So I kept experimenting with the tools I have available as an artist, which are broad, as we all know. We have a lot of tools in our toolbox. So this was an aesthetic process that I took myself through. There were time elements, because it was broken down into 3 sections. Each was 3 years. The first section simply restored the uplands riparian zone and designed paths, designed the landscaping, worked out the relationship to indigenous species in terms of smell, color, texture, view perspective. The third section was just on restoring the salt marsh portion, and that was when I began to interact more collaboratively with scientists, much more actively. So I experimented with a lot of collaborative forms. And the third part was about the relationship between the restored salt marsh and the broader Gulf of Maine system. And that's when I began to outreach and use the internet more and more and more. And that shades over into relational aesthetics, issues of relational aesthetics. So I don't know if that answers your question specifically about this project, but that's how it worked.
I mean, that's very convincing, and now I'm suddenly thinking, however, on let's say the personal process. I'm not sure, I never attended any workshops with Anna Halprin, but I remember reading about her workshops and her concern with the earth.
Yes.
But it seemed to be kind of self-healing process, not so much actually let's say, addressing a perhaps less convinced audience of fellow citizens.
I think that's true about Anna Halprin's work. She's very spatially conscious, and she certainly cares about the earth, but I'm not sure that she makes a connection between the physical actions in her dance work and consequences on the ground. There's a growing movement of ecological artists who are specifically concerned with this. It's not just putting a sculpture in a forest or working with leaves. It's about what we did in the workshop. You know, how are we going to deal with this stuff? This is a very big deal. We might not have a species in another 50 years if we don't do something about it. That's a pretty astonishing thought, but it's not inconceivable. If extractors run rampant over the earth, there's not going to be very much left. We really will devastate our resources, and yeah, there might not be anything to support the extractors, but there won't be any of us either. So this is a real issue. I think the dancers of the 60s and 70s gave me enormous tools, and many of them I knew or know, and I worked with a lot of them.
Caprov too?
Capro?
Was he involved with environment?
I think over the years before his death, he was more interested in the environment. He kept telling me that I had to finish my book. I've been working on a book for forever. I just haven't finished it or found a publisher. But he said, you know, hurry up. There's not much time left. And he's right. He's right. He was right. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I think it's complex to sort of say, you know, I was thinking about the movement section that we're doing, which is very similar to contact improv. You know,
Right.
saying you're going to resist a certain
Yeah, there's a lot of
came
that.
out of the 70s. That was Steve Paxton.
Absolutely.
He talks about what he was doing. It was not about trying to find a new aesthetic. It was about sorting out his personal issues with people. So it was, you know, it's like a way of sorting out conflict and friction. So that's this sort of, you know, we have this practice now. But I was just thinking how it's so easy to say, well, that's the negative force, this is the positive. This is the bad and this is the good.
But it's a
Because we're as equally dark as we are light. Each one of
Yes.
us. You know, we are this complex human being, and it's saying that we are all responsible for this. You know, it's too easy to point the finger.
Yes.
Which we do in these situations because we are a society, in Western societies especially, of complacency, of seeking comfort. So, you know, we're saying, oh, you're bad doing this, but we're all wanting comfort. We're all wanting these phones. We're all wanting these ways of getting places faster in transport. And so we're creating the problem that we're also seeking the solutions for, which is a very funny place to be in. And that's why I guess I go back to the notion of effort, because I think that a disease that's happening amongst us is we're becoming effortless. We're not wanting, you know, we want to move less. We're wanting, you know, how can we minimize things so that we have more, I don't know, recreational time, we have more time for retirement. You know, like, what's that about? It's as if we're saving our energy instead of sort of, as you were saying, you know, you do have to channel it, whereas because it can get diffused and lost or wasted. But I think there's something to be said of our lack of effort that is, in a sense, not only a muscular but a mental atrophy.
Let's take that idea of effort, because I think there was one thing left out of that workshop that we did, that little exercise. This is a test. What was left out were people. I don't think anybody volunteered to be the community. And that's a deal breaker, because the trees and the water and the air cannot protect themselves against what people are doing. But people can protect ourselves with some effort, and each other, and ultimately the trees and the water and the air, and so on. And it does take effort.
Why do you think the people showed such proprietary concern about their rocks? And
Well-
is that not actually a good thing to be concerned
Absolutely,
about your
absolutely. I
community?
knew what I was doing. I knew that I would provoke a very, very strong reaction. And it was a calculated risk because on the island where I live, there is no police force. So if the islanders think that somebody's doing something they should not be doing, especially if they're away, especially honestly, if they're a middle-aged Jewish woman from New York, they can get very upset and they can be very aggressive about how they express being upset. So in fact, in the middle of this little project, somebody stopped my assistant in the supermarket, I was away at the time, and said, does Aviva want to have her house burned down? And it was not a joke. They were quite serious. They were quite serious. So, and when somebody said, well, you know, we're going to subpoena you, and they were all gung-ho, we're going to get you in jail for this, I took it very, very seriously, and it was a very powerful performative exercise. The performative aspect was not just in painting the rocks, although climbing around on the rocks, believe me, was very performative because they tumbled down into the water. What was performative was calculating, and this again is where contemplation comes in. What's the action I can take that will provoke that has the chance of provoking the result I want? The result I wanted was to restore those wetlands. And I knew that an option would be that they would burn my house down and I would leave the island and the wetlands would not get restored. It really was an option. But I was calculating that maybe it would work. And now the whole town loves that area. It's like the centerpiece of the island. People come from all over to see it, spend time there, because it's beautiful. And that just came out of thinking about it a little bit.
Did you call a town hall meeting or something?
No.
To explain your action or...
What I did was I published things in the local newspaper. I said, well, I've been asked to wash the rocks, and I've been told that I may risk being subpoenaed. So-and-so has told me this, one of the selectmen. And so what I've decided is on these hours, this date, I invite you all to come join me to wash the rocks clean, and we'll talk about wetlands. And since that was before the wetlands had been restored, the water was stagnant and it smelled really, really bad. So they had to hang out there all day long while the cars went back and forth watching us clean the rocks, and they had to smell that awful water. So they came away with some motivation. And I'll tell you, a denouement of this was that when they did have a town meeting about whether or not we're going to do this and whether or not the government's going to kick in money and so on and so forth, I was explicitly told to shut up, because they did not want anybody to sow any further discord. As it turned out, I then went away and came back. As it turned out, they did the first version of the correction with poor engineering, and I could have told them that they were doing it wrong. But they were so busy telling me not to make waves that I didn't have a chance to be engaged. I'm not sure, in retrospect, how I might have handled it differently, but I think when artists get involved with this stuff, you learn a lot about what's going to work and what's not going to work. And that's part of what informs your thinking when you decide how to act. I spent a lot of time. I spent 2 years poring over the maps for that region. I was looking for the trigger point. I was looking for the point where the maximum wildlife would impact the largest region if it were restored. I don't remember what else I was going to say about that. Oh, but the point is, by looking at the maps, by studying the maps, and because I'd done the restoration work myself, I knew what was going to work and what wasn't going to work. So when I saw what they were doing, I knew that the road was going to flood. That's what happened. They flooded the road when they opened up the marsh, and then it froze in the winter. And the ambulances couldn't get through, the mothers couldn't bring their kids to school, the fishermen couldn't get to work, and they were in an uproar. So then they had to redo it. Well, if they hadn't been so scared of having an artist involved, I could have said, you know, look at this. This may not work because you've got a depression in the road and you don't have any culvert there that's going to be big enough to channelize the water coming through. So there's a chance that in the winter it's going to freeze and you won't be able to use your road. There's only one road on the island, so that was it.
It's so interesting to listen to you. I'm sorry, it's extremely fascinating, and I had just one more comment.
Please. I'm delighted you're fascinated.
In the 90s, I lived in Chicago, and Jane Jacobs and other curators were funding or supporting community activism in certain expanded sculptural projects that involved artists going into particular neighborhoods working with community. And I felt what was strange was that some projects worked really well when the artists were locals. And let's say the Latino neighborhood kind of knew these people.
Right.
Whereas sometimes artists, they go somewhere and, you know, and you become a trigger, but you are actually an outsider,
Yes.
so to speak.
And then you leave.
So this notion of the artist as coming in, how do you deal with that? Or do you sometimes dress up as not artists?
Believe me, on the island I could dress up in a clown suit and they would know exactly who I was, and more than I know about myself. No, actually that was a very big issue for me when I started this project. It was right after Richard Serra had done the Tilted Arc in Manhattan, and I don't know if you all know about that experiment, but that was a very large public art sculpture that the community detested. They just hated it, and ultimately it was taken down, and it's still in storage as far as I know. I thought about that a lot too. I do spend a lot of my life thinking, and what I decided was I actually had to live wherever I was going to do what I was going to do. So it was a very deliberate decision, and again for me it was a big risk to go buy the town dump in this island and decide that I was going to stay, and to stay for 10 years, because I said in my press release, and I always do what I say I'm going to do in my press release, this is going to be 1990 to 2000, and believe me, there were times, I discussed this with my psychiatrist. There were times, and not only did I have a psychiatrist which I was in touch with by phone, but for my first couple of years there, it was a party line phone. There was no such thing in the beginning as having a private phone. So here I was on the phone with my psychiatrist talking about this on a party line on this island where gossip is the currency of life. Anyway, he said, well, you know, maybe you ought to leave. And I said, I can't. I've committed to this. It would be like, you know, a dancer, you go out on the stage and you decide, oh, maybe not today, I think I'll just go home now. You can't do that. It's not an option. And as an artist, that's how I felt about this project. And the funny part about this whole project in terms of the community relationship was I never felt like I had totally solved the community thing until at the end of this project in 1999, there was an opening at the Historical Society, and the church organist, who is now in her late 80s, was playing church hymns, and I love church music. So I wandered over and I started singing to her accompaniment, and she said, oh, would you come to the choir rehearsal tonight at the church? And I said, well, I'm Jewish. And she said, that's all right, so was Jesus. So I did, and once I got there, I decided, well, you know, maybe I ought to take this seriously. They want me to sing, you know, they like having me here. I was the youngest one in the choir, everybody else is 85. So I did. I took it very, very seriously. And at first, the church congregation did not know what to make of me being up there. But they've since accepted me, and I've actually gone through a lot with this little church in terms of the politics of the town, which is a whole other story that maybe sometime I can tell you all. But the point is that I fell into a situation that integrated me in a way in the community that I might not have found on my own. And this goes back to the idea that we cannot solve this all by thinking. A lot of it we're going to simply solve by being in the situation and letting ourselves stew on the problem. And sometimes you stew on the problem a lot longer than you'd like to.
It's amazing that your singing voice made a difference, huh?
Well, because of it, I started taking singing lessons. And now I study bel canto quite seriously. So I've studied it now for about 13 years.
I was just thinking that when we saw the slides on the right-hand side as a durational performance.
Yes, definitely
durational.
durational.
Durational performance and how it's sort of timely what we're witnessing right now in North Africa of action, people's bodies
Yes.
on the street. I mean, we're witnessing an amazing moment in history.
Absolutely.
And it's because of these bodies that are going into the streets. Literally building graves for themselves and standing in them, saying, we're not leaving, we're not removing our bodies from this space. And we're still in the midst of it.
I think the world is dramatically changing about that. I felt that in Copenhagen. I realized suddenly people are demonstrating all over the world. It wasn't just in Copenhagen. The whole experience is everything except the Bella Center. It was in the media. It was on people's minds. There were demonstrations everywhere. There was the 350.org group that was doing stuff all over the world. And at that point in my thinking, I felt like something had dramatically shifted. In fact, I wrote a sort of rambling article about it, and it was called The Horizontal Press Conference. And it was basically about the whole time in Copenhagen was like one huge press conference. The problem, of course, is that the extractors have spent a lot of money with disinformation, especially in my country, and we've lost a lot of opportunity for momentum at this point.
Thank you so much. Are there other comments or questions that you...
Yeah, a comment on maybe the opposition to extractors could be quite considerable if, again, this is a personal anecdote. I'm partly Texas-based, so
You don't sound like you come from Texas.
I know, but that's my home. And so in the winter we go to Big Bend, which is a mountainous area in the desert, but it's also a natural park. And you run into other people who go on hikes there. And it's actually quite a number of people who go hiking, and there are strict and very carefully preserved rules in the park, what you can do, what you can't do, and you sense from the people that they love this park. In other words, they love their natural situation there, and there is probably a huge number of people who have some sort of relationship to nature, and that's a huge potential of people who could be activists, right?
And a lot of them are.
Yeah, and we underestimate that maybe, how many people actually
Well, you probably know that in the late 19th century, one of the big issues was the whole concept of beautification. That if people are in nature, they're less prone to crime. And there's a fair amount of evidence for that. You put people in a beautiful environment with trees, they behave quite differently than if they're in a horrible environment with burnt out buildings and broken glass on the streets. And it goes to a lot of different issues. There are a lot of issues involved with this. There's urban planning, there's city planning, there's activism. They all overlap. Again, I'm just saying that as artists, there's a way in to these kinds of questions that we can expand on, we can exploit, we can develop.
Can I just...
Yes, please.
Because I've been thinking this since Gretchen talked about the effort thing. And I think that it doesn't need to be an effort for us to... It doesn't need to be an effort. I mean, before we were nomads, and we collect from trees and we move to another place to let the nature restore itself. So I think maybe nowadays it's just a question of changing the habits. Because
So, pardon me? Habit, yes.
My English is. So it's like we are not used to help the nature nowadays. We are not used to it.
I think that's a very important point.
But like when I was a kid, I didn't like to brush my teeth. At a certain point, I got so used to it, I can't leave my house without brushing my teeth. What about if that's our role as artists?
I totally agree.
See that it doesn't need to require any effort. It just needs to become an habit.
I think an effort to create a habit is effort. Anytime, any shift.
Yeah,
Shift. You want a shift in action. You have to. That's what I would say is effort. I don't mean effort as a negative sense of pain. It's.
Well, two things on that. The subtitle of the Ghost Nets project was Escaping the Trap of the Familiar. And I thought of the familiar as like those drift nets that are invisible, they're indestructible, and they're completely lethal. But I think you made another point that's really, really critical, which is humankind until recently has thought of nature as either an adversary or their personal refrigerator. It's a big shift in thinking to realize, oh my God, we are the parent to the child. We are the ones that must be the caretaker. So when I sign my emails, they're always signed, what the world needs is a good housekeeper. We have to take care of our house. I don't think it's an impossible shift, but I don't think it can be underestimated what a big shift it is. And in indigenous societies, that is the norm. They do understand that if they don't take care of their environment, the environment won't take care of them. So it's not inaccessible.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Can we just send greetings also
In the light.
to our internet audience? We thank Aviva Rahmani.
Thank you so much for attending. It's been my honor.
Allowing permission.
Yes.
Allowing permission to broadcast, and this is our first official broadcast from the winter 2011 series of the Brunel Research Seminar. So thank you very much for joining us here. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
It's
been a great pleasure.
Coffee or cats.